Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of the Bronco interior build, and let's just dive right into this. I've gathered all of the nylon parts here. There is also the shaft for the steering wheel, but we're not going to need to paint this. And if I do, it's just going to be just one coat of paint just to seal the nylon in. All these parts here are going to be shot with an automotive grade filler primer. It's just in a spray can. I picked it up at the auto parts store. I'm going to spray this with 4 coats. After the 4th coat, I'm going to go ahead and color sand everything, and that is going to dramatically reduce the lines in the nylon from the 3D printing process. So we'll grab the door panels and make sure that you use some flush cutters to trim off the little studs here that were holding both door panels together. You're also going to want to snip off the front interior mount and the rear interior mount, just like that. I am going to paint these as well. Now be careful here, this part's a little bit flexible, but that is going to be reinforced when we put this back in here. Same with these side walls, there's a little bit of flex to them. Any thicker and the price would have just skyrocketed. Well, skyrocketed even more. Also note that the steering column will require you to install 2 5x8 ball bearings. I've thrown some bushings in here, and the bushings are going to prevent overspray from getting onto the bearing surface. After it's been painted, you can then pop these little bushings out. I suppose you can use the bushings. There you go. This was, however, designed for ball bearings, and these are the 5x8 by 2.5 millimeter ball bearings. We'll jump right into some of the dash assembly. This is the dash insert panel. This is for the glove box door. And you'll see that there are 3 holes in it, and I did apply a wood grain decal that I found on eBay. It's a car vinyl wrap is what they call it now, but it's made by 3M. You can get samples for under 10 bucks, which are more than large enough to do your entire interior. On this dash panel, you're going to use this Ranger XLT badge. Now, this does come with 2 of them because of its size. This is incredibly tiny, very fiddly, very delicate, so please be very careful. I, in fact, would recommend not using these cutters like I am, but actually filing this down. On the production model, I'll have some slightly longer ones, and I'll make this a bit thicker, but it's still going to be very, very delicate. To install this, just line it up to those 3 holes. You'll want to align it to all 3 of those holes, and then from the rear apply some glue. So I'm going to do that off camera. And when that's all dry, it'll look like that. I painted everything in a matte black, and it's very important not to subject this centerpiece here to much heat because it will warp. Again, the production model will be a bit thicker, and all chrome detailing has been done with this particular chrome pen. I don't remember where I got it, but it's a liquid chrome pen. Next, we'll install that dash panel onto the actual dash, and we'll just put some glue in the little holes. This is a high quality model glue. Do not use super glue or cyanoacrylate because it will completely ruin the model due to its outgassing. We'll just apply a little bit of pressure to that while it cures. For the trim panel, I did again paint this black. I then went through the center of it, it's a little hard to see here, in a brown color because I went wood grain, and then I used my chrome pen. As before, apply a very light amount of glue to each one of these holes, and when it dries you can actually do the same to the reverse side, and then we can drop this in. This does not go in either direction. You can see there's just align the studs at the rear to the holes, and it will fall right into place. And be very, very careful pushing it down. This is a thin piece of 3D printed material. All right, and there that is. We will turn our attention to the dash vents. There are 3 separate vents and 2 registers. This is the central register, and this is the outer one. It is very, very important that you be careful when you're cutting these off. In fact, I would use a very small file to file them off and not cut them. These vents are designed to pivot. In here, you'll see the little holes. However, they may require some filing to get them to fit. Do not just align it like this and shove them in because it is very likely you will snap them depending on some of the tolerances. So I'm going to very lightly sand down the bosses and the edges and make sure that it just pops into place easily. Now note the small tab in the center is next to impossible to see. Sorry, you can see it like that. That actually aims down, at least in the images that I've seen. And then we'll just take this. Here is our tiny, tiny vent register, and it should very carefully pop in there, just like that. Do not use any kind of mechanical aid to get this in there because these are very, very tiny. And there you have it. It is actually a working, directionally functional here. Okay, I'll detail that up first and then put it in. Vents are detailed, focusing just on the horizontal areas here and the sides of the vertical areas, because when these dry, I can flip them over and very carefully and easily apply more glue to the backside, which is going to be easier. And then we'll take some tweezers and just drop it on in. Come on. There you go. I've put a tiny amount of glue on the rotating part of these vents because I want to lock them in place and just make sure they don't fall out ever. There you go. All right, that's done. So although the dash has been painted, I want to note that this hole, this hole, this hole, and these two outer ones all must be tapped with an M3 machine screw tap. This is a very, very hard and brittle material, and if you do not tap these holes, you will crack it. For this half of the cluster, we are going to need the front bezel, the inner bezel, and the main instruments. These were spray painted silver initially. Then once they were painted silver, I shot them with black. The black will prevent any light bleed, and in this case here, I want no light bleed at all. And at the rear, you can see that some of the silver is exposed, but I'm not too concerned about that. The reason I shot the silver first is the silver will allow more light reflection internally because this is a clear piece of plastic. Now, what I'm going to do is, in my application, I want this to look good illuminated, so I'm going to sand down all of the high spots. This is not necessary. You may not want to illuminate the dash, and you can then go about very carefully detailing everything here, which will look stunning. However, I do want this to light up, and unfortunately that will lack some of the bright colors which will be visible during the day, but at night it'll really, really pop. To sand this down, you may have seen me in earlier videos, we're going to take some sandpaper and just very carefully brush it across the surface. This is going to take a little bit of time, but just focus on the high points, and eventually all that paint will come off, allowing light to pass through only that area. I'll be here a while. I very carefully sanded down all the embossed areas that I wanted to. Obviously the center area here where it's chrome right now is going to remain chrome. And for some of the fine details, I just used my X-Acto knife to very gently scrape away the areas that I wanted to have illuminated. Please be very careful. These are incredibly dangerous. I also cleaned out these two little areas. The production model will have a little indent, and that is the turn signal. So I will just take my green Sharpie and go ahead and just run that across. As for other areas like the needles, I'm going to use my orange Sharpie for that. And there are a couple of idiot lights, and please do not be hesitant to actually look up images. So here we can see there's the fasten belt, the brakes. In fact, upon confirming where some of the light locations were, I found this I found this silver-backed cluster, which I really, really liked. And I think it'll add a little bit of depth and contrast. So I'm going to come back with this, mask off the outer extremities, and paint this silver. And as you can see here, that is red, that is red. So we'll take our Sharpie and just run those across like so. You do have these two lights here. These just illuminate the headlights and the washer. Although I'm not entirely certain that these light up, I figured, why not? We're here. And again, don't forget your air conditioning controls and your radio. I want to cut a piece of Lexan for the instrument cluster lens. And to do that, we need a square piece of Lexan to be cut, 41 millimeters wide by 18.5 millimeters tall. These are the dimensions from my CAD model. Cut slightly larger in the event that you have to cut it down, but there's a pretty good overlap here, so you should be okay. I cut this piece of Lexan out of a leftover scrap I had from an RC car, and you can see that it'll just, yeah, there it goes, right in there. So drop the Lexan in. We'll take our completed bezel. That can go right in on top of it. And you're going to want to glue it down in this area here, and potentially in this area. Now I recommend a couple of dabs of hot glue for a couple reasons. One, it's easily removed, and two, hot glue isn't going to accidentally seep in here and screw up the finish on the lens. This does still have the protective finish, so we'll peel that off. The final piece that will go on is the illumination piece, which will just pop theoretically, there we go, right in like that. And we'll hold it all together. And this would be a good point now to put a little bit more hot glue on this panel here. That is a mock-up of what we're going to be left with. I'll do a little bit more detailing, but this is coming along nicely. We'll install the instrument cluster. We need to take off this little blue stuff. There it goes. We'll take our bezel, grab our lens, making sure not to get any fingerprints on it. Then we'll get our trim piece here, drop that right in there. And this should hide the glass directly inside because the glass is sitting in a recess. I'm going to glue this, and then we'll put the cluster on the rear. And we'll put a little more hot glue here to hold it all together. With the hot glue cured, we should have something pretty nice. And you can see I didn't put globs on it. I just kind of ran it across the bead. We still need to make sure that it fits inside the opening of the dash. So we're definitely onto something. Now there is some more trim that has to go on here, but those are little knobs and they're fairly fragile. So we want to make sure that we've got it so that we're not going to be handling it as much anymore before we put those pieces in. We can now test fit this into the dash, and it should just drop in. And this thing should just seat itself like that. I will again use hot glue to secure this in place. Okay, a little hot glue has been placed in there. Now we have this, and I am really getting quite excited to actually finish this thing up here. So let's go ahead and do that and put some knobs into the radio, the ignition, the ashtray, the headlights, and the wipers. For this, we'll use these little knobs here. Now, when you snip these off, they will shoot off into oblivion. So please be very, very careful. It probably would even be best to file these off instead of actually cutting them. We'll first install the ignition key, and that is this little flat one right here. Note that I've tried to keep as much of the standoff as possible because this will allow it to slot in and bite a little bit better. And friction should hold it in long enough for us to flip it over and put some glue on the back side. The headlight switch and the cigarette lighter are both these two here. They're very similar. So I just made one part. These two with the little triangular bases are for the radio, and the one with the hexagon top is for the wipers. Here's our cigarette lighter, our radio. So the radio doesn't have a through hole, so you have to trim it down slightly more. And for that, we'll put a little dab of glue into both of those holes there. We'll just drop that in. The final two are going to be the headlight and the wiper. So we'll drop the headlight switch in, and we'll drop the wiper. Cool. And now we're going to have to let these dry. And don't forget to put glue on the back sides of these. While those are drying, let's focus on the steering column. So here is our column. And because I went with the automatic version, I'm going to grab my automatic gear shift indicator. We'll snip this right off. If you look very closely, we have a P, N, D, and a 2. Technically, there should be a 1 there as well, but they're just too small. We very carefully detailed these. Not that I can even read that, but it's done. And then we'll take some modeler's glue, grab this, and just slot it. Get in there, you, right in there. It should push all the way. There it goes. Just like that. Not that it's even visible when it's in the car, but we'll know it's there. We can take advantage of this time to get the straight arm here. Not to be confused with the smaller one. This would be for the transfer case. And put a dab of glue in the round hole. Turn signal. Actually, there's a little extra here on the back that I want to trim off because I don't want it to bind up later, and we'll just push it straight on in there. And then on the opposite side here, again, if you have the automatic version, you can have the shifter right there. This large one here is the shifter. We'll snip that off at the bottom, and again, put some adhesive. All right, and this will just slot right in there like that. Let it dry. We can turn our attention to the steering wheel. This is our horn button, and it needs some more detailing, but I think it might be easier to detail this when it's on the steering wheel. Put a little dab here, kind of around. There we go, just like that. And you can drop that right on top, just like that. We'll let this dry. As you can see, I went with a two-tone color scheme. I just masked it off. And we want to finish the door panel by installing the door pull and the window crank, and that's going to be pretty darn easy. Our door pull and our window crank will reside with the trim pieces. The window crank, make sure that you don't cut off that first boss. You want to cut it at the intersection between the larger and the smaller, and we'll just give that a snip. Door pull will just come off like that. In this area here, we'll just run a little bead of modeler's glue. That's straight into the hole. And the window cranks are the same for both sides. Pop this sucker in and then flip it over and you want to apply a little more adhesive on the back side. Now I want to make sure that I don't have them in the same orientation. We can see that they're both aiming up. Maybe we'll just spin this down just to give a little variation. Now that the automatic steering column has dried, we will take the column, the wheel, and the steering shaft and assemble these. So this step is only going to be necessary if you actually want to see the steering wheel turn on a separate servo. And now these are 5 by 8 by 2.5 millimeter bearings. These are very, very common in Tamiya cars. Any Tamiya people out there probably have 1,000 of these bushings laying around as well. You can use the bushings. I'm going to go ahead and use the bearing, and we'll slide the steering shaft all the way through. Then we'll take our steering wheel and we're going to align it as vertical as we can. And I'm not going to glue the steering wheel because that'll allow me to make some fine-tune adjustments. All right, we'll just push that just carefully. Don't want to break anything, of course. And there is about 0.5 millimeter of play. And otherwise, we're going to have our steering wheel now. When we install this, you're going to have to lean it over a little bit. Take your dashboard, and that should slot in just like that. There's also 2 holes here at the bottom. These are going to align themselves on some pegs in the interior bucket. So we'll put these aside for now and prepare the bucket. With the dash panel, the door panels, and the steering column all done, we can focus on the interior bucket. So for this part, we're going to take one of the door panels. Doesn't matter really which side that you start with. And if I turn this around, you're going to see that the door panel will line up just like that. I did notice something though with this print. If I line this up perfectly here, note at the rear it bows up. So there appears to be a little bit of warping with the print, and the way to get around this is we're going to apply some hot glue on this door panel, allow it to cure. When that's done, I can peel this back a little bit, put some hot glue down there, squeeze it down, and this has quite a lot of flexibility. This should allow me to glue that down, and everything should remain pretty darn straight. As this is the automatic version, we are going to use the short gear shift for the transfer case. If you have the manual variant, you'll use the remaining shifter. This is the little bent one that would go here for the manual gearbox. You also want to make sure that this hole is opened up. There's a lot of paint on this interior, so I may have slightly plugged it. You want to make sure that this fits a 3 millimeter drill bit at minimum. We're going to pass a screw through here, and we need to make sure that it properly aligns with a boss directly under the dash right there. You also want to confirm that these two and these two here are also cleared. Did some more detail work on the interior while you weren't looking, and I'm going to put the dash in right now. So I've got some M3 machine screws. As I mentioned before, with the high detail dash, you must use these screws. Otherwise you will crack it, and with the nylon version, you should drill this out anyway to 2.6 millimeters, each one of those 5 holes, and then you'll be able to self-tap them in. Once these two, and this one screw are installed, the main dash is in. It'll be pretty secure in there, so we can let that be. If you're wondering what the heck is going on back here, I've installed the lighting set that I made. I have an entire video as to how to wire your own LED lights. We can now put in the steering column. Now this is going to be an operational steering column. So what you're going to have to do is bend your own wire to go from this point here, just a little S bend, to go to a servo that you place here. I'm going to put one in a little later on with some double-sided tape, and then have it attached to that servo. So we want to line up those 2 little studs with the holes in the bottom of the column right there, and then make sure that these studs go into those 2 holes right there under the dash. I found that I'd sprayed this so many times that I had too much paint on these posts, so I just scraped it off. Since I only tested this in the mechanical package on Creo Parametric, I decided to go ahead and actually put the servo in. So there's just an S-bend 1 millimeter rod that I bent that goes from there to the servo horn, and the length is going to depend on where you've placed your servo and the size of your servo. Just a little Hobby King servo, which is actually broken, but I might as well just throw it in here. It has a tooth, I think, missing. So that's all it's doing, really. You can see that. You just want to make sure that the maximum extension doesn't interfere with any of the internal components here, so it doesn't bind or anything. But that's really all there is to it, and I just attached it with a piece of double-sided tape. I also wanted to note that it is possible to install this linkage with the dash installed. You will have to pull the column back out and slowly fish it through. It's a pain, but if you push the back of the column low enough, you can get it in here. I would recommend that if you did want to do that, to put the column assembly roughly where it's supposed to go before the dash comes in, and then it's a little bit easier. Since we're here, I'll put in the transfer case shifter. This is the shorter of the two shift linkages that comes with this kit. Since this is the automatic, this is all I will need. And there's our shifter. Next, we'll put in the door panels. As I mentioned earlier, I did find a little bit of warpage on these door panels, and I'm going to exaggerate this in this particular orientation. You may or may not find this. I suspect that it's due to the 3D printing process and the orientation. So I am going to drop this in, use some hot glue on this back surface to adhere the door part, let that cure, and then I'll push the back down and that will align it nicely. I'm using hot glue for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's very forgiving. It can be removed with heat applied to the backside, and also there's really no smell associated with it, and I'm working indoors. So let me go ahead and attach the door and then we'll fix the back. With the front part of the door panel cured, we can see that at the rear it's sticking up about 2 millimeters. So I'll just pry this back a bit, run a little bit of hot glue in this area and push it down like this while it cures, and we'll be all set. All right, with the glue cured, you can see that it's level there and level in the front. Let's do the other side. The next bit to install is going to be the rear panel. This piece has some alignment tabs here on the back side. Well, this one doesn't, but your production model will, and it will align like that. Put some hot glue in and you're done. The last component to install is the roll bar. There are 8 screws that hold this roll bar on, and here's the reason. These 4 in the front that go into these posts, so that one, that one, that one, and that one. These are all the M3 screws that will self-tap into this boss. The other ones, these 4 here at the rear that are through holes, these are for additional stability. Now I know there's a lot of people that are really into scale out there and will not want to see this random screw sticking up. So you can cut these off and sand them nice and smooth so that all you have are these embedded ones. But please note, you're going to dramatically reduce the structural integrity of the roll bar, which is the body mount. So it's up to you. I'm going to use all 8. For these, make sure that all these holes here are cleared out with a 2.6 millimeter drill bit, and then use an M3 self-tapping screw. For the larger one, make sure that that one's cleaned out with a 3 millimeter bit and use an M3 machine thread screw with a nut on the other side. This concludes the detailing and assembly portion of this series. In the next video, we will install the mounting points on the Traxxas TRX4 Bronco, plop this in, put the body on, and we'll be all set. I do appreciate you all for watching, and we will see you next time.